So anyway, me and the kids sat down last night after watching Death of a Nation, Dinesh D'Souza's movie, and we read the chapter on socialism in Assault on America, which is just a really great book written by an author from here in Greenville. And we read the chapter. It's one of my favorite stories about what actually happened, the real first Thanksgiving story, where, we've always been told that the Pilgrims were dying and starving, and then the Indians saved their butt. And that we had the Thanksgiving, some version of this story, because we were really thankful to be alive and thankful for the Indians. That's not what happened, not even close to what happened. And we reread the story again because we're talking a lot about fascism and socialism and what those are after the movie. And a lot of people don't realize when the Pilgrims were so desperate because they wanted religious freedom to come here, that they couldn't afford passage, and so the investors paid their passage and sent them to the New World, and they were to farm and send back the proceeds, and then the investors would make money selling it. All right, so far so good. Well, at the last minute, the investors got greedy, and they didn't want to give individual pilgrims plots of land that were their own. They were afraid, and so what they did was set up a socialist system. And they said, okay, everybody's going to live in one big communal, house living structure, and everybody's going to work the same land. And for that, the Pilgrims were supposed to basically take what they needed to survive, send the rest back to England to be sold. Well, I asked my kids, I said, well, what do you think happens? You get the same amount of, food, sustenance, clothes, no matter how hard you work. How hard would you work? And they both looked at me and went, not very hard. Well, that's what happened. And the resentment began to grow, even among these very religious, moral people, who had fled so they could practice their religion. The resentment began to grow because everybody had different work ethics. And it got to the point where, the best workers wouldn't go in the fields anymore because the worst workers weren't pulling their share. They were mad. And they practically starved to death. The governor at the time writes this amazing piece on how they were boiling leather from their boots to eat it. They had starved so much. So the decision was made by the governor and the Pilgrims that they were going to break the contract with the financiers, because what the heck, they're across the sea. What are they going to do about it? And they took the land that they had been given to farm, and they divided it into plots, and they gave each individual family a plot to work. And immediately the productivity went through the roof. In year one, in the socialist experiment, they did 26 acres. That was it. And it wasn't enough to feed them, much less send anything back to England. By year three, working the exact same land, but divided into plots now, owned and controlled by the families, they farmed 184 acres in that year. Planted, sowed, farmed 184 acres versus just 26 under socialism. And they not only did they have a surplus after they sent back the food to England, they had enough that they were then able to sell some of it, begin to acquire more land, and eventually opened a trading post where they traded with the Indians, and were able to send back more, also to make more and to begin to be prosperous. So and I showed the kids and said, listen, now the poorest among them knows who did the least, the deadbeats. Look at what the deadbeats did in that system. 26 acres the first year, 184 the third. And it's a shocking thing. And so the Thanksgiving celebration was for the prosperity that came in the second year after what they called the starving time. And they describe, and you described what this governor was describing. It sounds exactly like Venezuela right now. They're eating cats and dogs and rats and whatever they can catch. They even ate corpses they dug out of the ground among the dead. I told my kids, look at what they just did in Venezuela. They raided the zoos and ate the zoo animals. And my son goes, even the lion? I'm like, even the lion? They ate the lion.
So socialism almost killed this country before it even got started.
Yes. And so the first economic system that this country had, it's fascinating to read the governor's writings about this experiment, was actually socialist, and we abandoned it after the first year. And some actually did starve to death, but it was just a horrific year. They abandoned it, and after that, the system was capitalism, and everybody did a lot better with that system. And the governor wrote about, these are very religious people, but every man's character that he's born with inherently is different, as is the work ethic, the ingenuity, and, ability to want to thrive and survive. So kids and I were talking about, it's a fascinating story. It's fascinating to listen to the governor tell it. My kids both said the same thing to me. They always do. Why aren't we told about this in school, Mom? I said, why don't you teach a teacher about it? I bet she didn't hear it either. Yeah. Take that passage to school from the governor. Read to her what really happened. We didn't not survive because we didn't know what we were doing, and we needed the Indians to tell us because we were so stupid. That's not what happened. it was a socialist experiment gone wrong. And I said it ended exactly the same way that things ended in Venezuela today. And then we talked about socialism. I told my daughter, I said, this would be like, when you work really hard. She had a history test at the end of the year that she did really good on. She got the only 100 in her class because she's a history buff and she loves it. And I said, okay, so what if you got 100 and you got the only 100 in class? But the teacher came and he said, it's not fair. Why don't you give 15 of those points to somebody else? That way you'll have a B and she'll have a B too. And she's like, no. I said, okay, that's a socialist system. I said, well, you would want to complain about that, wouldn't you? You'd be real mad. You'd want to go tell everybody and vent, wouldn't you? And she said, yeah, well, if I sent some police in to beat you up and mess you up a little bit so you wouldn't talk about it, that's a fascist socialist system. And I said, you'd be so scared you wouldn't talk about it. She said, I'd want to go to another school. I'd want to leave. And I said, well, yeah, of course you would. I said, people trying to get out of Venezuela, too. They're streaming over the border into Colombia. And, so we talked about that. We pulled some articles about Venezuela. And I mean, it was just striking how similar what's going on in Venezuela right now is to what's went on with the first generation of pilgrims. And the thing my children could not understand. Like, okay, if this is in history and this governor wrote about it and we know this is real, well documented and everything, why is the guy in Venezuela then trying to do this again? Don't they know it won't work? My son, who is a political genius, I swear, says he's the 8-year-old. He says to his 10-year-old sister, he goes, they just do it for votes. He said they don't want to earn the stuff themselves to give to the people to get them to vote for them, so they take it from other people. And he said, and that makes the people like them so they can get votes. And my daughter goes, but that makes people starve. How does that make them like them? I said, oh, by then they have total control. Yeah, exactly. They don't care. I said, they take the guns. And I said, you know what, not Hugo Chavez, but his successor, I forget what his name is, Maduro.
Yeah, Maduro.
Well, what Maduro did, but it's been within the last year, is as they began to riot for food, I said, the people don't have guns. Maduro gave guns out to his supporters so they could put down the riots among the hungry. I said, that's fascism. That's what Dinesh D'Souza was talking about in that movie, Death of a Nation. And she said, she said, my kids are still kind of traumatized. It's been a couple days later, and I didn't know this was in the movie. There was this one group of students who protested at their university what the Nazis were doing, and they thought they were, terrible people. And a beautiful girl, her first name was Sophie. I can't remember her last name. She was beheaded by the Nazis, at 22. And my kids were horrified watching this. I think it's kind of giving them nightmares. I didn't know it was in there, but I probably would have had them watch it. And I talked to my husband about it. I said, do we really want to shield them from the reality, though? Do we really want to? I mean, this is life. This is the world. This is the world they live in. This is a lesson that they need to learn. And my daughter said, why couldn't they just put her in prison? Why couldn't they just, like in prison or something like that if they wanted to shut her up? I said, because they can't win the argument. They had to shut her up permanently because they can't win the argument when we have the kind of history we have, like what happened with the Pilgrims. If people are allowed to make, cogent arguments about it and bring up history, no one will want to do this. So they have to silence those who criticize them. And I told her that's the same reason I'm being throttled by Facebook right now. But, we see this again and again in the repeating in history. My kids, it's just so interesting to run this stuff by kids because the reactions they have, all of it is so illogical that the kids can't understand in their simple world, well, if it doesn't work, why are you trying it? I know. I don't know. Ask a liberal.